All right, thanks, Wendy, and good afternoon to all. As Wendy said, I'm Tony Bergantino, Director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System, and welcome all to the Conditions and Outlooks webinar, the first one of spring. And here in Laramie, it has been quite springy. Robins are singing. We've had some chives coming up in our garden, but they might be in for a little bit of a shock in the next couple of days. But they've put in their presence. The presentation today is done by my office, the University of Wyoming Extension and USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, U.S. Geological Surveys here, the Missouri River Basin Forecast Center, the National Weather Service office up in Rapid City, and then the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And we've got a lot to cover today, so we'll look at the current drought and climate conditions, surface water conditions, spring flood outlook, risks, weather outlook, forecasts, and then we're going to follow that by an overview of the Weather Service's National Water Prediction Service. So without further ado, here is the current U.S. Drought Monitor from this morning, or rather released this morning. It's from Tuesday, the 9th. A lot going on in the last month, some good, some bad. The good in green was from improvements stemming from a few snowstorms in the west and across the south, but unfortunately, the failure of those storms to do much for the northeastern quarter of Wyoming has resulted in the degradations for most of that area, and those can be seen outlined here in red. If we do a comparison to 1 year ago, you can truly see the dynamic nature of the drought, drought in general, really. The southeast wasn't faring too well last year, but it's drought-free this year. The far northwest was drought-free or tinged with D0 or abnormally dry conditions, and now is D1 or the moderate drought. The west was in D1 or even D2, which is severe drought. And now it's either drought-free or just in the abnormally dry category. Bighorns last year were drought-free, and now they're in severe drought. Here's the updated timeline of drought in Wyoming since the start of 2000. This also shows that dynamic nature with the ups and downs. We stand at just over 54% of the state in one of the 5 categories of either drought or abnormally dry conditions, and this is actually down 2.2% from the last webinar. However, the area in D1 or worse, and those are the categories that are actually drought, that percentage went up about 4% or a little bit more from the February 15th webinar. Zoom in, just showing January 2020 to the present, shows some more detail of the ebb and flow of conditions. Almost 46% of the state has no D category depicted whatsoever, and that is just another way of looking at that 2.2% I mentioned on the last slide. The flip side, though, is that the amount of state in D2 or severe drought has more than trebled since the last webinar and is now at almost 6.75%. If there's any good news to share regarding that, is at least down about 1.5% from last week at least. And these timelines are updated weekly, statewide and for individual counties, and they can be found at the link down here on the lower left. This is showing the last 2 weeks of precipitation as a percentile, sort of an arc going from the southwest to southeast, bowing up in the middle where we've been above the median in a few areas, sort of at the median where the gray is bordering it, and the rest of this has been below to well below median, with the Bighorn Basin and areas in the far northeast really standing out. Looking back 3 months, you can see that similar arc going across from the south, although longer term it extends farther north in the west into Fremont, Hot Springs, Eastern Park counties. Unfortunately, the Northeast is showing well below median precipitation those last 90 days, and this is reflected in those degradations to the Northeast that were shown on the drop map at the beginning. Here's year-to-date map showing precipitation as a percentage of average. The left is the water year-to-date. Water year starts on October 1st, while the map on the right is the calendar year, which naturally starts on January 1st. So the span covered now on these is just under 3 months on this one and just under 6 months on the water year. And what stands out between the two depictions is the The southern part of the state has increased in its percentage, while that swath going north into Fremont, Hot Springs, southeastern Park counties, well, still above average, it's decreased in terms of its percent of average. Except for a few isolated pockets, the Northeast and the Bighorn Basin have lost ground, some places significantly as far as their percent of average precipitation. We'll be keeping closer eyes on those areas. So this is the standardized precipitation index map, or the SPI, for the last 30 days, 60 days, and a year. And it just reinforces that dryness that's in the Northeast. So in the interest of time, I won't dwell too much on these, but you can see quite a bit of that red showing up there in the Northeast and getting darker. Looking at 14-day average minimum temperatures over the last 2 weeks on the upper right, lows still below freezing, although a very few small pockets in Platte and Goshen counties were close to having minimums above 32. Western areas were the coolest, obviously, with lows approaching 0 on the average over the last 14 days. Other cooler areas, as expected, were the other higher elevations of the state, such as the Bighorns, the Snowy Range, Sierra Madres. For departure from average on the lower left here, west and south central regions were well below average generally by as much as 3 degrees, with the far west being as much as 6 degrees below average. And then the rest of the state above average to some varying extents. Same maps and time frame, but for maximum temperatures, daytime highs on the upper right have generally been above freezing, except for the very, very high elevations. They're still getting down into the mid to upper 20s during the day. West of the Divide, east of the over to the Laramie Range, highs as much as the mid 40s, while east of the Divide, except the Bighorns, highs in the upper 40s, with most areas actually being up into the 50s to mid 50s, a few areas even higher. Departures from average down here on the lower left show the state somewhat divided in half from north to south, with the northern areas being about 6 degrees or up to 6 degrees at least above average, while on the southern half of it, temperatures were the opposite, going down as much as 6 degrees below average, though most in that 3 degree or less range. Fairly similar story with soil moisture when you compare the last 2 weeks. Very similar pattern, although one can generally see the decline, especially up in the Northwest and over in the Northeast, where those colors are changing a little bit more drastically. Snowpack by basin shows all basins below what they were this time last year, unfortunately. Not unexpectedly, some of the greater differences on the negative side are up there in the Northeast. At this time last year, all but the South Platte in Wyoming was above median, and this year only 6 of the 19 basins are above median. Our lowest basin now is the Belle Fourche at 39%, with the Cheyenne only 1% higher. And the Powder is still only at 63%, and that's compared to 112% last year. So quite a difference there. These two maps show the remotely sensed snow water equivalent across the state today and from 1 year ago. We still had a lot of snow water in that southwest quarter of Wyoming in the low elevations at this time last year that we're just not seeing this year. Of course, last year's that snow down there was somewhat of an anomaly, so it's not as different from median as that shows, but compared to last year, it's sure quite a difference. Looking at departure from median, this shows that from the snow water equivalent in inches, the southwestern side of the winds, Bighorns, and a few other areas around stand out in the reds, while those purples and greens show areas that are actually above the median. I kind of wish there were a few more of those colors on the map. Basin status, I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but invite you to visit that link down there in the lower left to view the table and keep track of that as the days goes by. It shows the current status of each of the basins relative to their individual percentiles. Quickly point out that the Belle Fourche, which is tied with its minimum, there's a circle in purplish. And then the Cheyenne and Powder, which are now currently below the minimum snowpack. The Little Snake there, circled in green, is the highest of the basins in terms of percent of median. And here's our journey to peak snow water equivalent this season. I mentioned the Little Snake on the last slide. It's the only basin that has reached its median peak so far, which it did 2 days ago. The fourth column there shows that it did so 18 days early. I should point out that the peak in column 3 is the peak so far, and obviously it could go higher, so or hopefully at least level out so as not to lose ground too early. And lastly, I'll leave you with a graph showing the progress through the year of 2 of the basins that I mentioned. On the left is the Powder, which has performed pretty poorly since about the start of November, except for a few days this and last week. Their circle in red has been below its minimum, and it's been below that minimum since about the middle of December. And when I say minimum, I'm referring to minimums that have been observed since, I believe, 1981 for this basin. Today, it dropped back down below that minimum, unfortunately. On the right is the Little Snake, and the area circled in green is the current peak, and you can compare that to the green dot to the right of it, which is the median peak for that basin. As I said, current peak is more than 2 weeks early, but hopefully we start to go back up a bit before the runoff starts. And speaking of runoff, I suppose that's a good segue to our next speaker, and that's Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS, who's going to talk to us about surface water conditions. Take her away, Aaron.
Thanks, Tony. So here's a look at the state. This is from our National Water Information Dashboard, and the dots on the map are presented. The green is a 25th to 75th percentile. That's what they consider a normal range. That's a pretty good spread of range. So, and then above normal is a light blue. That's the 75th to 90th percentile, and then there's some darker blues that are much above normal, larger than the 90th, and any orange or red on the map is below normal or much below normal, below the 25th percentile. So if you look around, you kind of see a fair amount of green, a fair amount of blue, and light blue. So in general, the flow conditions are normal to above in the state for stations that are reporting. To the next slide. So just to kind of get a feeling for where we are, this is a 7-day runoff for the state. So it's an amalgamation of reporting gauges in the stage. The vertical axis is runoff per millimeters per area. So, but mostly what I want to present is this is early spring is kind of a transition time, depending on where you are, a grain of salt here. But it's a transition time from winter base flows to where we start to see some runoff coming off from the low to mid elevations. So yeah, we're about what we expect, and we'll probably start to see some higher flows. So this is a little different than what the real-time data I just presented, showing some higher flows, but looking at the past 7 days, it's kind of in base flow conditions. So most sites are reporting. We still have about 23 sites in ice. So we can move on. So just bouncing around the state up here at the North Fork of the Shoshone, kind of see, this is looking at the water year through the fall and into the winter. We're above normal, above that 75th percentile, and things started to kind of drop into more normal conditions into March, into that base flow recession. And then we're starting to see a significant uptick in flows as either precipitation moves to the area or snow starts to melt. I suspect we'll see that change here depending on as weather conditions do. So it's probably not the start of runoff at this site, but just a bit of a small amount of water moving through the system. So onwards to the middle fork of the Powder near Barnum. We'll use our imagination a little bit here. There's some missing winter record that needs to be estimated there, but just kind of assume that that's consistent, a straight line through there. So kind of normal conditions, pretty close to the median through the winter. And then we're seeing another kind of uptick in flow as either precipitation or warmer temperatures start to melt out some lower elevation snow and put that into the much above normal condition, which the grain of salt is there. We're really not dealing with a whole lot of water here, so kind of much above normal for base flow it's not drastic. Okay, moving on down here to the encampment above Hog Park. So the same, we'll have a little good faith that that's kind of a straight line there for that missing winter record. Things are a little bit closer to the 25th percentile, a bit lower flows kind of coming off the water year here, and especially through the winter. And at that site, really haven't seen much of an uptick in flows. I know that's a bit higher elevation down there. So, but yeah, things are kind of hanging out around that 25th percentile there. And then moving over to the Gros Ventre near Kelly, starting at the water year kind of above the median, and then as we get into the winter, things kind of continue to recede a little bit below the median, and then kind of hanging in that median area through the winter, and then just a small uptick in flows in the last week. So not a whole lot of change there, and it still looks like we kind of have a good month till you start to see runoff in earnest, with the caveat that that's looking at historical data. So moving to the reservoirs, it's not a time of large water supply in general in the last few months. So there's been mostly minor changes in storage. Most major reservoirs are 60 to 80% full. The exceptions to those, not a big change. If you look at Fontenelle's, changed quite a bit. It's been decreased 46% since November, and Palisades has increased 30%, but I'm sure Liz will provide more information on that. But in general, not a big period of gaining storage. And so with that, I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. And speaking of Liz, Liz Cresto is next with the Bureau of Reclamation to talk about reservoir storage. Liz?
Yep, I'm Liz Cresto, Bureau of Reclamation. I'm out of the Wyoming area office, and we cover the Bighorn and North Platte basins. So starting off with the Bighorn side of things, we're looking pretty good for this time of year, given the abundant water supply last year. So Bull Lake's 47% full, 93% of average. Buffalo Bill's 74% full, 113% of average, and Boisen's 84% full and 112% of average. So going to the next slide, we are still in the heart of winter operations, but winter is coming to a close here shortly, and we'll be changing our outflows from the reservoirs. So starting at Buffalo Bill, we're releasing 360 CFS, which is what we've been at all winter long. You see on the left, we are scheduling a flushing flow for the time frame of April 9th through 11th, and we'll increase the releases up to 5,000 CFS, and then after the flush, we'll go down to 1,000 CFS, at which time irrigators are going to be starting up, and then we'll just maintain our releases based on either irrigation demand or maintaining that rate of fill on our reservoir. For Boisen, we're still at 1,000 CFS, which is where we've been all winter, and Game and Fish hasn't requested a flushing flow yet that I've seen. So no flush as of now, but that still could happen. But I anticipate us upping those outflows kind of in that early April timeframe. Bull Lake's maintaining 31 CFS outflow, and same story there. They'll just probably increase their outflows as the spring progresses. And then at the bottom of the screen shows that website where you can find water order changes. So you'll see what we'll be doing in terms of our next change. That one thing to note about that Buffalo Bill flush is that that news release has not been issued yet, but that is coming. So check our website out for more details on that flush and the schedule if you're interested. So let's switch over to the North Platte. As of March 20th, Seminole and Pathfinder are right around that 63 and 67% full, which is about 120% of average. Glendo's 72% full, 98% of average, and Guernsey's 45% full or 115% of average. Right now, we're not expecting that the reservoirs will necessarily fill, but the good news is that with the current forecast, we do not anticipate any allocations on the North Platte. So North Platte is also under winter operating releases. So we're releasing 530 CFS out of Cordes, 25 out of Glendo, and Guernsey is turned off. We have scheduled a flush from Gray Reef Reservoir, and that is out in our news release. So you can go out to Reclamation's website and look for that news release. But basically that will occur between March 25th and April 3rd. And the way they schedule those flushes is it's a daily fluctuation of flows between 500 and 4,000 CFS. And after the flush, we'll go back down to 500 CFS. And those water orders can be found on that website. Yes, one thing to note about those flushes, all the flushes that we do from the reclamation facilities are at the request of Game and Fish, and so that we're coordinating the pattern of those releases based on what Game and Fish is requesting. So that's all I have. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Liz. Now we'll go to Melissa Smith, who's with the National Weather Service up in Rapid City to look at forecasts and outlooks.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to start off first with where we are at on our weather calendar. We are still in our winter storm season. This is the time of the year when we typically get our spring storms. The ice is still coming off those rivers and lakes, so ice jam potential is still there, even though this year we have lost a lot of that ice already. We are entering our first kind of fire weather season. It's what we call our shoulder season for fire weather. This is kind of after we have our winter snow and right before our green up time period, where we have a lot of those dead, a lot of times, a lot of dead fuels, a lot of dead grasses. So we kind of are just starting this fire weather shoulder season. And additionally, we are in the high wind season that we typically get in the springtime as well. So our next slide. If we look towards the next 7 days, this is what we're expecting as far as total precipitation forecast. We are looking at almost daily chances or near daily chances for some multiple rounds of light to moderate mountain snows, especially over in those western mountains, over in the Tetons, and especially the winds. We are looking at some good chances for snow over there, but we are looking at snow across the entire state. More snow across the northern portions than the southern portions. So there will be daily to near daily chances for light snow. Next slide, we're going to look ahead a little bit. This is our 8 to 14 day outlook. We are looking at a greater chance for some below average temperatures in that 8 to 14 day outlook around that Easter weekend going into the beginning of April. Accompanying those colder than normal temperatures, we're also looking at an increased chance for precipitation, which is some good news, especially after we looked at where we're sitting on our snowpack and what those drought conditions are doing across the state. This increased chance of precipitation combined with those colder temperatures would probably be in the form of snow instead of rain. So let's look ahead into April. Now for April, there's some indications that some portions of the northwestern portion of the state are going to lean towards some warmer temperatures. Otherwise, there's really no indications as you go further to the southeast. As far as precipitations, there might be a slight increase in a chance for some precipitation in that northeast corner, especially where those drought conditions are a little bit worse. But overall, the chances when it comes to April, there is really no indication if they're going to be above or below normal. So we'll go on to the next slide. And I want to talk about our summer outlook here. I kind of skipped over the spring outlook. And the reason why I skipped over that is there really is no indication on whether or not we're looking for a warmer or colder or wetter or drier spring. However, we are starting to see some indications on what our summer is going to look like. Right now, we are in a pattern called an El Nino. All that really means is that temperatures over the eastern Pacific Ocean around the equator are warmer than average. And those warmer ocean temperatures will keep that storm track mainly over the southern United States. We don't tend to get a lot of that moisture up here in Wyoming. However, we're going to rapidly change that pattern, and it's going to swing the opposite way. Those temperatures in the ocean are going to become colder. And when that happens in the summertime, we get to what we call a La Nina pattern. When that happens for the spring, that storm track starts to push a lot further to our north. So during the spring, there's really no way to give an indication as that storm track moves through. But as it gets too far to the north, what that means is by the July and August timeframe, there's a lot stronger indications that we are going to be below average for precipitation and that we are going to be warmer than average for temperatures. So as we look towards that summer time period of June, July, and August, especially in that July and August timeframe, there are some strong indications now that we are looking at warmer temperatures with drier conditions. And that's something that I just wanted to give folks a heads up for as we move into that summer season. So now we're going to transition over to the River Forecast Center, and they will talk about water supply and flood potential.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Lau with the National Weather Service Missouri Basin. I'll be talking a little bit about the water supply forecast for the entire state, including not just the Missouri Basin, but the Colorado and the Columbia as well. So sort of a mixed bag. And this is the National Weather Service water supply, not the NRCS. A lot of folks recognize the NRCS, and they also issue water supplies. This is for the April through September timeframe, with the exception of the Colorado Basin. They do a April through July. But for the most part, the dots you're looking at are a percent of normal for the April through September time span, the volume that we usually see. So beginning in the north along the Powder, we're looking at somewhere in the 70% range of normal for the Powder. And then moving over to the Tongue, we're into the 60s percent range as far as the volume of water between April and September. And then when we get to the Bighorn, that kind of stands out because we're actually looking at over 100% of normal for the Bighorn Basin. And there are some sub-basins in there that have quite a little bit of snow in there. So that sort of stands out. Moving then over to the Yellowstone to the far left, we're looking at about 130% of average there. Moving south then into the Snake Basin, we're looking pretty close to just normal. All those sites are, when you average them up, are about 100% of normal. And then moving down to the Green River Basin, that's about 80% of the normal. And again, that would be the April through July timeframe, about 80% of the normal volume in the Green. And then lastly, I'll move over to the North Platte. And the North Platte, we're looking at a good year, a healthy year, about 100% of normal there. And so that takes care of the water supply. And then with the next screen, I'll talk a little bit about flood potential. So greens are good. This year, we're not really worried about flood flows as much as we are the dry conditions. So it should come as no surprise. So this is our flood risk over the next 90 days or mid-March through mid-June. And no sites have a 50% or greater chance of seeing minor flood stage. Now, that does not rule out that flooding could not occur. River ice poses a challenge to our models, our river models. And so wherever there is river ice, there is the risk for flooding. Also, our friends over at the Northwestern River Forecast Center, they did want me to mention the Salt Basin, the Salt Snake. They do have an increased risk for flood, but it still doesn't get to 50%. But that's because of the healthy snows that they're seeing in the Salt Basin. But bottom line, over the next 90 days, the Weather Service is really not worried about any sort of flood risk for the entire state of Wyoming. Oh, and this morning, the National Weather Service issued its national spring outlook, if you will. They call it the National Hydrologic Assessment. But when you review these slides, you can go to that link there and see the spring flood outlook for the entire nation as issued by National Weather Service this morning. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'll pass it back to Melissa to talk about the National Weather Service's Water Prediction Service and their website.
All right, so this month, I want to talk about our highlight of the month, and it's going to be an overview of our new modern page. So the National Weather Service is in the process of transitioning our hydrologic web presence. We are going to transition from our current Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service, or our AHAPS webpage, which we've had available for at least the past 20 to 25 years. But it's outlived its architecture, it's overdue for replacement and modernization. So the actual code that is used is going to be rewritten. Our new hydrologic web pages are going to be mobile friendly, and our new web pages are going to be hosted on a scalable cloud infrastructure. We're also going to have a new geospatial and an API driven data service. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Our new webpage is going to go live on March 27th, 2024. So here just next week, we're looking at these pages to be going live. There is a preview page currently available. This page will be up until the 27th of March, where you can take a look and see how this new platform is going to work. So the current water.weather.gov website is going to be combined with the water.noaa.gov platform to provide all of the National Weather Service's water data and water forecast information. This new platform is going to allow new products and services to be introduced by the Water Prediction and the Operations Division of the National Water Center, which will get that information more readily available to everyone. As we rebuild and do this migration, we are going to be merging our web presence and our new web pages. So our current web pages are only going to remain operational for the next 60 days. So therefore, if you're using those pages, please, after March 27th, transition over to the new links. After that 60-day timeframe, we will have a redirect that will be in place until March of 2025. So you're going to be able to see some current navigation and enhancements with several features. We're going to have a new national map. We're going to have new current data and forecasts. Everything that we have now is going to remain the same, but our display is going to be improved to communicate this information a little bit more clearer. There's also going to be additional enhancements such as the hydrographs with our flood levels, impact information, probabilistic graphics, and even some areas will have flood inundation mapping where it's available. So we'll go look at this a little bit more closely. Let's go to our next slide. This is what our main page is going to look like. It can be bookmarked to any extent, and it will also geolocate your location if you choose to do so. In the top left, there's a search box, which will allow you to search by state, National Weather Service office, by a particular gauge, or even by a particular river. Therefore, if you want to zoom into the state of Wyoming, you would just click Wyoming in the box, and it would actually zoom to the state of Wyoming. Under the map on the right-hand side, you can choose from 4 different backgrounds. There's a topographic map, there's a satellite map, there's a dark background and a light background. But by default, the topographic base map is displayed. You can also save your background and the extent as a permalink if you choose. This is a big enhancement over our web presence right now. There are also several layers displayed on the map where you can find the river gauge observations, forecasts, and the long range outlooks. You can turn observed data and forecast data on and off, or by flood category, or you can get a gauge count of the sites that are within each level. And this is a much more customizable display than what we currently have. So on our next slide, there's a hazard layer where you can choose to display all your weather service products or even just the water related threats, and a layer with precipitation estimates. The precipitation estimates are available on a daily basis, and they'll typically be updated in the mornings. There's also a few additional ways to display precipitation estimates, such as the normal, the departure of normal, and the percent of normal precipitation is also available. So the image on this slide actually shows an example of what you can do. This was for a recent winter weather event. In this example, I set my extent. I added some overlays of counties as an administrative layer. The precipitation estimates, as well as the observations and forecasts, are displayed. You can adjust the transparency for each of these layers. However, as you zoom in and out, different things will be shown at different extents. So if you want to be able to see the counties, you have to zoom in far enough in order to see them. I also want to point out that you can set to see the values of precipitation amounts when you hover over the map. So when you're using the actual preview site, as you move your mouse across the map, you can choose to display those actual precipitation amounts. All right, next slide. So if you select a gauge location on the map, you will get a split display showing the location on the map with a white dot, and then where the gauge is on the gauge page. On the right side of the map, it'll say full information above the hydrograph. If you were to click on that, you will get a new tab that would open up with just the gauge page. And that has all the same information that we currently have on our websites. So we'll go to the next slide. This is what you would see after clicking on the full information. This is the gauge page. It's just an updated format of what we currently have. Information such as the name, the hydrograph, the flood levels are all still available, as well as the ability to navigate upstream or downstream to different gauges. The overall hydrograph is similar, but it now includes availability to scale the data to predetermined and user-defined timescales up to 30 days right below the hydrograph. Users also have the option to turn on and off forecast data as well as record data. And you also have the ability now to scale to flood categories. These are all enhancements from what we have shown in the past. So on our next slide, if we were to scroll down the page, this is what you would see. You would find hydrograph notes, you would forecast reliability. There would also be your flood impacts of what is impacted at different gauge heights. There'd be a map of the gauge location, crest information, and the gauge info. And now there's also, it makes it easier to find our metadata information that we are utilizing. You also have the ability to display the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer if it's available. And if you're at the proper zoom, the FEMA mapping doesn't display if you're too close or if you're too far out, but it is an option if you were to click on the checkbox. Just note that some of the FEMA flood hazard information might not line up exactly with the satellite and base map of the stream, just due to the different extents that they were mapped at. So on our next slide, this would be scrolling down a little bit more on the page to the bottom of the page, you're going to see the photos that we have available of the gauge specific information. You will see probability information if that's available for the site. Clicking on the icons or the dots below the photo will make the image active and larger. You will also have the ability to see some unique local information that's been added to each of the page. And then there's a general collaborative agencies disclaimer, some resource links, and what National Weather Service Forecast Office is in charge of this data for this location. So on the next slide. So this is more information about the API and the GIS REST services in the cloud. So all this data is going to be available on an API and the GIS REST services, which will allow anyone using the data to incorporate our information in their own applications and services. If you're not familiar with APIs and GIS REST services, they're pretty much very powerful tools that allow developers to get into our interface to grab our information to put them on their own displays. So this is a really nice enhancement with this new system. There is a preview site available for the API and what the official link is, but if you do plan to use it, I would wait till after March 27th, and then you can go and program from there. So that's the only information that I had. Oh, there's also one more. This is the National Water Model data is also available for our new interface. So the National Water Model, it's kind of in its beginning stages. So if you would like to learn more about the National Water Model, there's a link on this slide, but that information is also going to be available on our new interface. However, this is something new and I would expect it to be developed more fully in the future. But right now it is just going to be available. So I believe that's all I had that I was going to be presenting on this month. So I'll turn it back over to Tony. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Very, very interesting presentation on that, and looking forward to playing some more with that, and suggest to the audience to dig into that as well. Now I'm just going to turn it back to Wendy Kelly so she can wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Tony. And I want to thank all of our presenters today, as well as all of the attendees for joining us. And we will be taking some questions here in a moment. I just want to point out that each of the presenters' contact information, name and contact information is on this final slide. So if you have any questions or want to reach out to them, you're welcome to do that, as well as a link on, it's a QR code for how you can get involved. We've highlighted this in previous months, and I just want to note it again, that you can submit a condition monitoring observer report by going to this QR code and helping us to track conditions throughout the state as they change or even stay the same. So anything from too wet to too dry, and being able to provide comparable photos are always really helpful for us. In previous months, we've noted that you could go out, for example, on the first of each month and take a photo of the same spot and then compare it to a time when it was more normal. So it really tells the story of the conditions. So I want to thank everyone again, and I'm going to stop the recording and then check in and see if there's any questions either in the chat or in the Q&A.